You can achieve growth just like the big MSP players out there and never have to hire an MSP salesperson. You just have to have someone in your company who is capable of doing the things that you need to do in order to become effective at communication. And when you can effectively communicate, you can effectively create and implement a lead generation program. And when you can do that, then you can have a non-sales driven growth engine inside your MSP practice that actually works. And guess what? It's you. At some point, it's going to be you. And if you aren't the sales pitch person, then maybe it's going to be your marketing person. Maybe it's going to be your messaging person. Maybe it's just someone that you hire who just understands how to interact with people and to get meetings. Maybe it's a sales development person. It's probably going to be more like a business development person. There are a lot of options. That's the point. There are so many options that don't just rely on hire a sales individual or sales professional. The purpose of this episode is not to tell you to get rid of your salespeople or to immediately go out and hire people. It is to reorient the topic of conversation and the advice for a very, very common MSP problem, and that is flat or stagnant MSP growth and the almost reflexive advice and action that a lot of MSPs hear and then obviously follow. And that is to go out and hire a salesperson. The salespeople are going to solve all your sales and revenue and growth problems in your MSP practice. That is almost never true. And I'm going to explain why it's almost never true. I'm going to explain how, if that's a situation you're in currently, you can fix it with just a few tweaks. Not saying they're going to be necessarily easy tweaks, but they are things that shouldn't be very difficult to identify. But once you get a firm grasp of where your growth actually comes from, the decision to hire or not to hire an MSP salesperson will become far easier for you, and it'll make your life a lot simpler. Trust me, you're in for a great episode, and we're going to discuss a lot of this information. So the title of this episode, MSP Growth Myths and Why Hiring Salespeople Rarely Solves the Problem. It's not meant to be provocative. I'm not trying to do clickbait here. I actually believe that it's a real problem. I actually believe that hiring salespeople is a solution offered to a lot of MSPs who suffer from lack of MSP growth. And it's based off of that probably decades old advice. And it's still going on today because you can go to a conference, an MSP conference, you can go to a webinar, you can go on to an online post or a forum, and they'll talk about this. I'm suffering from MSP growth that is not great. How can I achieve better growth, more predictable growth? That's really what they're saying. They want predictability in their growth. They don't want to be caught unaware or just not have a good clue of where their next dollar of new revenue is going to come from. So therefore, go out and hire a salesperson, and that will give you that clarity. It'll give you that predictability. No, almost never does it work that simply, that easily. The mantra that sales has become kind of shorthand for growth in the MSP world is something that I'd also like to address in this episode. While at the same time saying, and I want to be very clear about this, I am not anti-sales. I have many friends who are in sales positions. They're sales professionals in MSP organizations. They do a really good job. They're true professionals. And in that scenario, they're doing what they should be doing. As we'll talk about momentarily, there's not a lot of those people out there. And so there's a real supply demand issue that we have to address. But also there's a reality of those organizations that have salespeople did quite a few things leading up to them actually hiring a salesperson that only because they did those things before were their sales efforts rewarded. And that is something that most people don't even talk about. And you just zip right to the end of I have to hire a salesperson, right? That's the thing that I want to temper your expectations, give you something to think about that is going to make that decision when it happens. And maybe it will never happen. But if it does happen, it should happen after you've done right laying of the foundation, I'll call it, in your MSP practice to make that salesperson as effective as you can make them. That is, in my opinion, how MSPs actually grow. It's how they achieve predictability in their revenue, and it's how they thrive. And if you are someone who wants to achieve that, this is the right episode for you. How do I come about this information, you may ask? Well, first of all, I'm not a trained sales professional. I don't pretend to be that. I never have. But I have studied MSPs for 26 years, and not just through talking to MSPs every day, but actually certifying and auditing MSP organizations. We sit on a lot of data. And for more than 20 years, MSP Alliance has been certifying MSPs all over the world. And so we accumulate incredible amount of information about how MSPs actually operate, including how their sales, how their revenue is actually accomplished. And so it is from that pool of data that I can give you my, I think, a considered opinion about how and when you might actually want to engage in a sales professional model in your MSP practice. The jump off point is naming the myth, starting about why do we have this myth in the first place? And the myth is if you have stalled growth, you have to hire a salesperson. When you hire the salesperson, your growth is going to be reignited and everything is going to be fine. That is the myth that has to be broken, because I hear too many MSPs coming back from an MSP conference where they were told, you need to be driving sales. You don't have a salesperson. That's why you're suffering. That's why you're flatlined. That's why you don't have predictability in your revenue. And they almost lay all the problems for why your financial success isn't there on the lack of a salesperson. That's number one myth that has to be busted or reviewed. Very few people in the managed services profession really ask why. Why is it that the automatic gut reaction, the knee-jerk reaction of lack of sales growth is you don't have a salesperson doing it? There's a lot of reasons why that has appeared as reality and hasn't really been challenged. It's easy. I think that's one of the biggest reasons. I think hire a salesperson is a fairly easy solution to why you may have a problem with growth. And it doesn't really require anything more than just throwing it out there and then move on. I think that ease of getting rid of the problem, kicking the can down the line, whatever euphemism, analogy you want to use. But I think a lot of people just fall back on just hire a salesperson. You figure it out. They never tell you how to do it. They never tell you where to go to find this salesperson. They never tell you what fundamentals need to be in place before you can even make a new managed services salesperson effective in your MSP practice. I never hear anybody really talking about that in depth. We'll talk about a little bit of those fundamentals here shortly, but it just needs to move away from that mantra of hire the salesperson and more towards what are some of the fundamentals that are missing in your MSP practice, and what are those that can be easily in order to achieve some more immediate revenue growth successes. That's, I think, more valid. I would also say that I think a lot of MSP business owners are in the position where when they find themselves coming into a new year and they had a review of their previous year and it was a little lacking. Maybe they didn't achieve the numbers that they wanted. And so they look back and they say, why did we achieve our goal? Why did we not achieve that revenue number? Well, it must be because we don't have a salesperson. So if we hire a salesperson, therefore we will hit our revenue goal for this year, right? you can see why that would be very appealing, because it is forward thinking, is action oriented, is do something immediately to solve the problem. Whereas doing nothing feels like defeat. It feels like you're giving up. It feels like you're not really working the problem. And no MSP business owner wants to feel that way. Trust me. I hear them talk about it all the time. They want to feel like they're doing something. And doing something, even if it's doing the wrong thing, can sometimes feel good. That's a problem that we have to break from in order to achieve real MSP growth. Growth problems in managed services are not sales problems. Your revenue failures are not because nobody's selling hard enough. That assumption pushes the attention of the problem outward instead of inward. What I mean by that is inward is where you find those fundamentals I talked about, the foundational elements of your MSP practice that need to be there in place, operating effectively in order for you to have achievable revenue objectives. And only when you have those fundamentals in place would you be able to go out, successfully find, first of all, then recruit an MSP salesperson, bring them on board, train them, and get them into a position where they can be successful and then make you successful by extension. Why do managed services behave unlike products? Put differently, do managed services firms behave differently than companies that sell products? This is a very, very well-established, well-discussed topic. If you are new to managed services and you've never heard this before, trust me, this has been around for decades. And it goes back to the idea that MSPs, or providers of managed services products, when I say product, I actually mean a service. I don't mean like selling a piece of hardware or a piece of software. Managed services are not transactional. There isn't an impulse buy, right? You're not going around, driving around town and you see a managed services shop, window, and you say, oh, there's a managed services product. I need one of those. I think I'm going to pull over and buy it today. It doesn't operate that way. Managed services is deliberative. The decision-making process is slow. It's very emotional. It is risk-based. There is a lot of thought that goes into an organization making the ultimate decision to buy or to do business with an MSP. It is fundamentally unlike buying a product. The buyers don't compare features like they do when they're buying a product. They're more evaluating trust of the MSP, maybe compared to another service provider, but sometimes it's just if they only talk to and only know one MSP, it's a matter of, do I even want to give that MSP organization all this access and control to things that I value greatly in my business, right? These are fundamentally not product buying decisions taking place. And treating this like a product, treating an MSP and therefore MSP growth like you would treating a carpet sales showroom or a car sales room or a sales room that sells refrigerators or sells computers or sells any other product that you can think of. You can't treat a managed service like that product. And that goes back to the age-old axiom that you can't apply a VAR, a value-added reseller sales model, to a managed services scenario. It just doesn't work. We know this to be true. You can't take a managed services, you can't take a VAR salesperson and make them successful in managed services. There have been a few scenarios where that's been true, but it doesn't happen a lot, and it is the exception to the rule, I can tell you. Value-added resellers who are successful at generating revenue and generating growth, because that's what they do as a VAR. They have a very good system They have a great sales team. They have sales leadership. They do training. They have data points and metrics that they are measured against to decide whether or not the salespeople individually and as a team are generating and achieving their goals. This is very rarely the case in managed services for a number of reasons, as you might guess. So you can't treat it like a VAR. You can't treat it like a product, a company selling a product, because you're not selling a product. You're selling something much more than that. And MSP buyers aren't looking to be sold, right? You go to a car lot, you're looking to be sold. I mean, maybe you already know what car you want, but you're in some deep emotional level, you're wanting to be sold. When you seek out an MSP, you're seeking generally a solution to a business problem. And the business problem isn't, I need a car to go from home to work or to take kids to school and back or to do daily errands, right? That's a very transactional thought process when buying, let's say, a product like a car. But buying into a managed services relationship, signing an actual contract with an MSP, that is very different. You're talking about wanting clarity, wanting confidence. You want to lower your risk. You want to solve the business problem that you have, whatever that business problem might be. And that's one great example of why this kind of just instinctive sales growth problems solved by hire a salesperson. A salesperson is going to solve your problem. It's not. It's almost never going to do that. Great MSP salespeople absolutely do exist. And again, I want to reiterate that for the record. They absolutely do exist. I know them personally. I know I've been watching many of them throughout their careers, and they do great work. But they do great work for a variety of reasons. This episode, again, is not an anti-MSP sales episode. It is about knowing when it is appropriate to engage in an MSP sales professional in your MSP practice, because for the most part, a lot of MSPs who are suffering from that stagnant growth have other reasons why they are stagnant. And it's not because of a lack of an MSP salesperson. When MSP salespeople work, they elevate the entire business. So this is not about, does an MSP salesperson really exist? They're not some unicorn out there that nobody can ever find. They do exist. They are rare. I will say that. I will say that really good salespeople are really good MSP salespeople just as rare, right? They don't grow in trees. They have to be cultivated. They have to either have some innate sales capability that could then be further refined with more managed services knowledge and wisdom, general business acumen, if you want to call it that. So MSP salespeople do exist. They can be made in some unique scenarios, and they can be certainly refined and sharpened, but it tends to be the exception to the rule, in my opinion. You know, there's a lot of reasons why I say this. They don't lead MSP salespeople who are good. They don't lead with tech stacks. They don't lead with tools. They don't lead with features. They talk about risk. They talk about business outcomes. They talk about business impact to the organization wanting to buy from them. They understand the buyer's world inside and out. They understand how to talk at a business level. And so they don't have to worry about, hey, I just met you today and I am hoping to sign a 3-year managed services agreement by the end of the week, right? That's impulsive. That's what a VAR salesperson is going to be tempted to think like. That's not how an MSP salesperson thinks. They think long term. They know they're in for a long developing sales cycle, and they temper their movements accordingly. And again, that's why they're kind of rare, is they're not impulsive people. They're not rash people. They're not people who have unrealistic expectations of what the sales cycle is going to look like. And as a result, they become quite good at managing expectations, their own first and foremost. They can manage expectations of the client. They can not be overly hasty. And last but not least, They can manage the expectations of their internal MSP colleagues, including the MSP business owner, by saying, look, we're not going to be looking at a 1 week sales cycle. We may be looking at several weeks to several months, depending on the complexity of your managed services operation, the type of customers, and so forth. But good MSP salespeople know this. They fundamentally practice it every day, and it makes them and all their movements on a daily basis effective and efficient. So why does hiring a salesperson fail in most MSPs? Because if you're following me up to this point, and you absolutely know that what I said is true, that you're hearing it from peer groups, you're hearing it from webinars, you're hearing it from marketing messaging, you're hearing it from MSP conferences that you go to. I got to hire an MSP salesperson. If I don't, I'm not going to be successful. I'm not going to grow my MSP practice, right? That's the myth, right? And you may be in the scenario where you've actually been that. You've been in that situation, and you've actually hired an MSP salesperson. And you might also be in the position where you went through a cycle with that MSP salesperson and they are no longer with you. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to MSP business owners who said, oh yeah, we tried hiring an MSP salesperson. It didn't work out. It lasted 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, year and a half, whatever. Why didn't it work out? Well, the MSP sales person failed to execute, somehow fell short of what the expectations were, is typically what we hear. I'll tell you, it may be true that you had a bad sales hire. I don't really want to talk to that right now, but I'd rather talk to the more realistic explanation is if you had a real sales professional and you hired them and they fizzled out, they did not produce what you were hoping, it was another problem. It was another cause to that failure. It wasn't the salesperson. In most of the cases, I think that that's a true statement, and I'm going to explain why. You might be of the opinion that all you have to do is go out, recruit, hire, and put into motion an MSP salesperson, and the next day, they're going to be bringing you contracts, dropping them on your desk. It would be nice if that was so simple, if that was reality, but it isn't. You know that. I know that. You can't just go to a new salesperson hire and say, go get me customers. Just go find them. Because one of the first questions an MSP salesperson should ask is, where are your customers? Describe them to me. Describe what we do as an MSP. Talk to me about what types of customers we currently have. What are the types of customers you would like to have in the future? These are good questions. These are sales-oriented questions. These are marketing, messaging questions that should be easily answered if you know what the answer is. If you don't know what the answer is, those are some of the lacking fundamentals that I talked about before. Those are some critical missing elements from any good MSP who wants to be growth-oriented will know messaging, type of customers, type of services offered, and be able to explain it in a succinctly elegant and effective manner. And I'll give you a great example. If you think that saying, I'm an MSP, now describe what you do as an MSP. Well, we provide IT support to businesses and organizations in the greater Philadelphia metropolitan area. That is about as helpful to an MSP salesperson as a map with no points or roads on it, a blank piece of paper, in other words. It's useless. It's virtually useless. You need more. You need something. You need messaging. You need craft. You need articulation. You need an answer to who are we as an MSP. If you can't answer those questions and answer it very quickly, how do you think an MSP salesperson is going to do when they're out there calling on people, trying to get them to answer phone calls and come to meetings and ultimately to sign their name to contracts? It's not going to happen. It's not going to be very easy. I'll tell you that. Maybe it's you don't have a marketing engine. It could be that you have a lead generation problem. And again, the lead generation problem, along with marketing, along with messaging, are all going to be things that you're going to have in place, meaning there've already been questions that you've answered in order for you to bring on and make successful an MSP sales professional. If you don't, all you're having is a person who has no clue what they're selling, and they have no clue to whom they should be selling that service. And that's why you're going to be frustrated in 3, 6, 12, 18 months. You have lackluster sales, and you're going to blame that salesperson for being not prepared, ineffectual, whatever the excuse is. But in reality, they don't have the tools necessary to be successful. You haven't given it to them. Hopefully this is starting to click, right? This is starting to come together for some of you who may have already suffered from this. Maybe you've gone through this cycle once or maybe multiple times. You have to have these fundamentals in place. You have to be able to understand where your customers come from. You have to be understanding of how you can attract those customers. What's your marketing? What's your marketing message? If you have a marketing message, then you can have a lead generation campaign that is successful. If you have a lead generation campaign that's successful, you can have a salesperson come on board who can become even more successful. And I'm not saying that every single one of these scenarios involves a salesperson. Let's address that issue. There are many, many MSPs who thrive without any professional salespeople whatsoever. How do they do that? Well, we've been monitoring and surveying MSPs for, like I said, very, very long time, decades. And one of the things that I was always struck by is that whenever we ask the question, where are you getting your new business from? Almost always, the single largest category came not from sales, direct sales output. That was fairly small in every single response that we got. The number one category of where are you getting new business from? The answer was referrals. Managed services, like many other professional services industries, is a referral business. And there are really successful MSPs who have turned their referral community, their existing customers who are really happy with them, they have taken that and they have put that into a lead generation, marketing, messaging campaign funnel that works very similar to how a sales funnel would operate, except there's no salespeople. It's account people. They're people who understand the business. They understand the MSP, what they do. They understand the customers that they're looking for. They understand the business issues involved. They can speak intelligently, all of that. But they're not real salespeople. They're account people. Maybe they're business development people. The point is, there are many, many scenarios where you can have strong, respectable MSP growth and not have a salesperson anywhere in the mixture. And again, I'm not being anti-sales, folks. I'm not. I'm just being realistic that there aren't enough good MSP salespeople out there, even if this was the answer. If it was the answer, then we'd still be in the jam we're in because there wouldn't be enough MSP salespeople to go around. Because there's so many MSPs out there, not enough MSP salespeople who can really do this work. So there has to be a non-sales answer to revenue growth. That's what this episode is entirely about. It's about retraining this knee-jerk reaction of, in order to achieve growth, you have to have a salesperson. You don't. You have to have an identity. You have to have a notion, a strong notion of who you are as an MSP. You have to be able to articulate that in some sort of core message. You need to probably have somebody with a marketing background and marketing skills take that message and refine it. A writer, perhaps, someone who has writing skills, who can communicate value very effectively. That is the core skill set of what any successful salesperson needs, or it's the core of what any successful MSP business needs in order to communicate on their website, communicate through webinars, communicate through social media, communicate through educational lunch and learns, whatever it is. It's that messaging. It's the learning and selling through education, which is why you have so many MSP business owners who are very effective salespeople, if only because they are one of the only people in the company who can really effectively answer those questions. Who are we? What do we do? To whom do we deliver these services? And why should you trust us? That's almost always something that an MSP business owner fundamentally gets. And even there's still a lot of you who don't understand that, who are more comfortable solving technical problems. You're more comfortable solving engineering challenges. And those are the things that really excite you. I get that. And it's to those of you out there who are like that, who are technically minded, who typically, I'm not going to say fall for, but you will be more receptive to this idea of, I got to go find a salesperson, or otherwise I'm never going to grow because I can't become a salesperson because that's not who I am. I get that. I get that thinking. I've heard that excuse a lot. It's not an excuse, but I've heard that statement a lot from MSP business owners. Well, guess what? You can achieve growth just like the big MSP players out there and never have to hire an MSP salesperson. You just have to have someone in your company who is capable of doing the things that you need to do in order to become effective at communication. And when you can effectively communicate, you can effectively create and implement a lead generation program. And when you can do that, then you can have a non-sales driven growth engine inside your MSP practice that actually works. And guess what? It's you. At some point, it's going to be you. And if you want the sales pitch person, then maybe it's going to be your marketing person. Maybe it's going to be your messaging person. Maybe it's just someone that you hire who just understands how to interact with people and to get meetings. Maybe it's a sales development person. It's probably going to be more like a business development person. There are a lot of options. That's the point. There are so many options that don't just rely on hire a sales individual or sales professional. And it's that breakthrough that I would hope some of you would hear and begin to look at in order to widen, not narrow, but widen your options for achieving true managed services growth in 2026. So, does this make sense? I hope it does. Again, if you happen to have a salesperson in your team and they're doing a good job, I'm not saying, and the last thing I want is you to take that I'm saying, get rid of that person. That's not what I'm saying. But if you are unsure of what your messaging is, if you really don't think that you have a good core message in your MSP practice, if you can't articulate that really well, you really don't have any business talking about hiring a salesperson because they're not going to be the ones typically who are going to solve those problems for you. That's a different skill set entirely. But it's a tool from that skill set that will be used by a salesperson. That's the key difference. Make it simple. Don't overthink it. Start with the fundamentals. After you have the fundamentals, if you then say, I want to try it out with a salesperson, I want to see if they can do it, try it. If you feel like taking that risk, then do it. But have a way to measure and have metrics that you can look back on and say, okay, did I pay this person and did I get something for what I paid for them? And did I give them every opportunity to be successful? My suspicion is that there's a lot of you who have dabbled in managed services sales where you never had a fighting chance at winning just because you didn't have those fundamentals of messaging, core marketing, articulation, and lead generation figured out. Until you get those things truly mastered, don't waste your time thinking about sales. Think about those aspects first. Trust me, that will help in so many immeasurable ways. It might actually have a big impact on your revenue. Give it a try and leave a comment if you have success or failure, or if you have further questions about this. I'd love to hear from you guys out there who've tried this and maybe you've got a unique perspective to share. As always, stay safe. Until next time.